Welcome back to the Change Your Mind podcast. I'm your host, Chris Ashley, and we explore the intersection between personal development, spirituality, and science. I'm excited for my guest today. We're going to talk all about Reiki and the Akashic records and all sorts of spiritual things. But first, a couple of quick announcements. If you head over to the links in the show notes, you'll find a link to my book, Change Your Mind to Change Your Reality. It was endorsed by Bob Doyle, Michael Beckwith, Marcy Shimoff, who were all in The Secret. It was endorsed by John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. So go check it out. You'll also find links to my free masterclass, some free downloads, my courses, my coaching, and of course, all my social media. So please come stay in touch, become a part of the community. Hi, I'm Chris. When I was younger, I went through trauma that caused me to feel broken and lost. But my life changed after I had a spiritual awakening. Since then, I've dedicated my life to studying and learning from masters all around the world that have helped me to create a life of fulfillment and abundance beyond my wildest dreams. Now I'm dedicated to sharing everything I've learned so that you don't have to suffer for decades like I did. I've seen people's lives completely transform, and I share it all right here. All right, so with me today, I have Melissa Amos. Melissa helps the spiritually curious all around the world cultivate their spirituality, embrace their intuition, and break free from past restrictions so they can live a life of meaning and purpose. Qualified as a soul transformation therapist, spiritual counselor, Akashic records reader, and Holy Fire Reiki master teacher, Melissa runs a global community, Soul Space, which helps its members embrace their full self, quirks and all, and discover more about who they truly are. Her new book, Memoirs of a Mystic in Training, inspires the reader to understand the thread that weaves through the tapestry of your life and reminds you of the endless possibilities that are available to us in the marvelous messiness we call our lives. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited that you're here. So I start all my episodes the same way, and that is by asking my guests what their origin story is. So I'd love to hear how you started on this path. Please share your story with us.
Well, it's always an interesting path, isn't it? Because, how do you get from being just like a regular person and then turning into somebody who spends their days delving into the esoteric and the energetic and all the magical things that are around us. And I think for me, I was pretty lucky. As a child, my grandmother was a hypnotherapist. So from the age of about 8, I think it was, she used to take me over what we knew as the Rainbow Bridge for no real reason, or at least I didn't think there was any real reason then at that age. Just really for relaxation and for enjoyment. And it helped cultivate in me this understanding that our mind is so much more than we maybe are led to believe. She took me through, like while I was at school and I was going through my exams and the stresses that come with that, she took me through different NLP techniques to help me expand time so that when I'm revising, that it would be like I'd been doing work for 2 hours, but only really working for 45 minutes. When I was feeling nervous, she'd take me through this circle of excellence, where I would stand in this spot and cultivate all of the feelings of confidence or calm or whatever it is that I felt that I need in that moment. And I think something happens when you grow up with that. And you realize that our state is something that we can really take hold of. I'm not going to say control because I don't think that's really true. But we can certainly merge and manipulate and use to our advantage.
How special and amazing for you that you grew up with a grandmother like that. Right. And it almost sounds like when you said Rainbow Bridge, I'm like, wow, it's almost like these magical places that you went with grandma as this little girl. So tell me a little bit more about how you ended up on this path. Did you just go right into all of the esoteric metaphysical stuff, or did you try and get a job in the quote unquote real world first?
Right. Kind of wish I could say, yeah, then I just floated from the Rainbow Bridge right into here, but it's not how it happened. But despite all of that and this refuge that I had with my grandma, I was just like a regular girl living in London, trying to make her way. And, I finished school and went to college and went to uni and started to tick all of the boxes that you're meant to tick as a woman person growing up. And I got the degree, and then I went and got the job, and I found myself somehow working in the motor industry, which, if I don't know about there, but here the motor industry has a kind of vibe to it. And it's one of those things that they say once you get into, you can never get out of. I did. So I went through various jobs, which I absolutely loved and hated, probably in equal measure. And I found myself in sales, which was very interesting and meant that I could help a lot of people, and I could talk with a lot of people and communicate with a lot of different kinds of people. And my sales team loved me because whenever there was some training to be had, I used to put my hand up and be like, pick me, I want to go on the training. And it was there I started to learn more about NLP and, like mindset techniques and rapport and how to build them. And I'd always known NLP from a therapeutic session through my grandma. And so it was really interesting for me to start to learn it from a sales setting. And, but despite all of that, I think a lot of the time I felt a bit lost. I had everything on paper that I should have had. I had the job, I had the money, I had the car, I had the house, I had the husband to be at that point. But what I didn't have was this deep sense of satisfaction. I kind of had this low level anxiety. I was quite disconnected from what I wanted and who I was. And whilst I made the most of that job, and I remember once saying, a trainer said to me, if you didn't sell cars, but you did what you do, you're doing what you're doing, but you're not allowed to say that you sell cars, what would you say you did? And I remember saying, I help make people's dreams come true. And I thought, yeah, I can deal with that. But despite all that, I was pretty stressed and not very satisfied. And because of that, I started to get massage and some treatments. And it was during one of those treatments that the lady that I was working with put her hands on top of my head. And I felt this feeling like I'd never felt before. It was like my head had been filled up with this, I'm going to call it peace. And it was like filling up and up and up. And then all of a sudden, it was like she'd pulled out everything that was in my head, which was a lot. There was, I carried a lot in my brain and in my mind. And for that moment, I felt this clear, empty stillness. And it was that really led me on to this curiosity of energy work.
I relate to your story so much. I also was working in the tech industry. Everything was great on paper, making six figures, all the same things, and then having panic attacks every night. And I eventually left, which is a scary thing to do, to leave that sense of security that we're told is the right. And take that leap of faith and questions and kind of follow ahead without really knowing where it's going to go. And also that emptiness and peace that I had before. And for anyone listening, I'm sure they recognize that feeling too, where it's like, wow, things really can be just clear and empty, and it doesn't have to be this constant train of thought. So was that woman who put her hands on you during the massage, was that Reiki that she was giving you, or was it some other energy work? Did you ever find out?
Yeah, it was Reiki. She finished the treatment and I went, because I wasn't expecting it. I'd booked in it was actually a facial I was having. Oh. And I just I was like, what was that? And she went, oh, it was Reiki. And I was like, yeah, no biggie. Just a bit Reiki. And so I asked her 1,000 questions, and she said, oh, why don't you book in for a treatment, which I did. And I remember in that first treatment spending half the time thinking, oh, I should have just booked a massage, because I was holding so much tension in my body. And the other half of the treatment going, oh my God, what is this sorcery that is happening? You know, I could feel feelings in my body, and I was really relaxed, and you know, she was picking up on things as well. And so that started me on this quite regular Reiki treatments, where I'd still have my massages, but I'd tag on half an hour Reiki, for example, at the end of a treatment every few weeks. And I started to realize that I was calmer. And it took a while. It wasn't straight away. It wasn't like, oh my God, I've had this Reiki and now I'm fixed. It was after a few, you know, a good few months, I would say, that I realized when I was under more pressure that I wasn't responding in the way that I used to. And then when she told me that she was moving to Australia, and I'm in England, and I was like, that's a long way to go for a treatment. And she said to me, why don't you learn it? And I thought, how do you learn Reiki? I thought that this was something that, I don't know what I thought. I thought you were
like born with it.
And then this series of synchronistic events happened within weeks. I was learning Reiki on my one day off that I had in 6. I would have like one weekend off in 6 weeks or something like that. And I happened to have this weekend off, and it happened to be Reiki training, so I happened to do it. And then it was 2 weeks after that I quit 2 weeks after that I was like, I'm leaving. And I found a job literally a week after that. And then I left. It ended up being a couple of months after. And that was when I started another job, which wasn't ideal, but I was in training. I was kind of in that. It was a real bridge between what I wanted to do, which at that point I knew was two things. One thing was to help people. I knew that. I knew even when I was in sales that I'd really like to get into training. When I'd go on all these training courses, I'd be like, I'd love to do that and just train the people and you know, get into all the psychology and all that mind stuff. But also I had this real thing that I wanted to, I remember saying to my boss as I handed in my notice, and he said, well, what is it that you want to do? And I said, I want to work with who I want, when I want, and how I want. And he laughed in my face, and he was like, that will never happen, because if you're working for yourself, you'll be chasing contracts up and down the country and all of this stuff. And now I work for who I want, when I want, and how I want. So.
And he's still probably in the same place, right?
He's still there. He's still there. I go in there sometimes. He's still there.
So I know you mentioned the psychology a little bit with the NLP, and when we spoke earlier, you were telling me you like to back everything else up in science. So do you how does science back up all of this stuff, all the mindset stuff, all the Reiki stuff? Like how do you interweave those two?
Well, I've always been quite cynical. I was always like, well, if this is going to work, I need you to prove it to me. And it was actually Reiki that when I first felt it course through my body, and I thought, well, I don't know, I can't understand how this works. And maybe it's the placebo effect. Maybe it's that. I didn't care. I was like, this is working, and I know it's working. I knew all about the placebo effect. I went to find out a lot about it, and that led me into this, well, hold on a minute, if there is this thing called the placebo effect, actually doesn't that tell us that our mind can help us manage pain? And that we can be expecting to take a pill and make us feel better or make us heal. And even if it's a sugar pill, it still does that. Then that, for me, is even more intriguing than dismissing it as just the placebo effect.
Absolutely. It's proof that we can heal ourselves.
Right.
And then there's the nocebo effect, which is the opposite, which is proof that we can make ourselves sick. Right. Yeah, no, it's amazing how powerful we really are.
Right. And, you know, my grandma, who was doing all these things, so she was a hypnotherapist, and she did thought field therapy, which we now know as EFT. EFT kind of evolved from thought field therapy. This was, you know, back in the 90s. This was some time ago. And she was an NLP, I think, master practitioner, they called them at the time. But how she came about it was actually it was definitely from the therapeutic viewpoint, but it wasn't from an energetic viewpoint. even the tapping. It was always presented to me. I think my grandma, I look back now and think, well, she was quite a trailblazer, really, to be doing what she did at that time. I think the way that she presented her work was through science and through proof and through the psychology and the psychotherapeutic aspect. So I had that. And then I'd had this NLP training very much through a business setting. And it was all around that and, creating relationships and all of this, which didn't talk at all about energetics. But then I start learning after Reiki, I started to learn, my first thing was about the law of attraction and the nature of reality. I went deep. I'm like, well, I read these books that spoke about how does this exist until you look at it and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And actually, the more I was reading it, the more I was thinking, well, NLP and our language and our expectations absolutely explains all of this in a very fundamental level. And that actually started to lead me down a bit of a route of the quantum physics and the metaphysics. And I would not say I'm an expert in it, but I'm very interested. And you just look at the nature of reality and the nature of, say, even the waves of the particles and how they respond to how a scientist, for example, expects something to happen, and that can change the outcome of what is actually happening. I look at things like that and I think, well, maybe we do create our reality then. And if we do create our reality in such a degree that a particle isn't solid and it doesn't come into form until we look at it, and that's the basis of what quantum physics tells us, then maybe our thoughts do create our world, and maybe we can understand how we can heal or make sick our body. Maybe we can magnetize to us all of these things that we're told that we can magnetize. Maybe we can connect in with a higher force of healing or guidance or angelics to bring through and to change the frequency of what we're looking at. And maybe we can tune into a person or into a field to help us understand where they've been in their past and look at the trajectory of where they're going.
Yeah, you and I must have read all the same books, because I'm like, yes, while you're talking. Like, I love geeking out about this kind of stuff too. And it's interesting that you said NLP ties into all of it. And at first I was like, that's interesting. But it makes sense because the language we use is so important, whether we're thinking or writing or speaking. Our language comes from our thoughts, which comes from our belief systems, which creates our emotions, which puts us on that frequency, right? So you said something at the end that was super fascinating to me about maybe you can tap into this field and around a person and figure out like where they've been and what they've gone through so that you can help them heal. So talk to me more about that.
Well, I began to eventually, after a while, I began to sit in circle, and in circle we were doing a lot of mediumship. So this is bringing through people who have passed, and psychic work. And so we were really focused on doing that in a like reading session. And I loved all of that, but I started to question about, well, hold on a minute. If I can use my cards or my psychic skills to predict the future, then how does that fit in with the law of attraction, for example, which tells me, well, I can create my future. So how can I predict my future and create my future? They don't seem to go well together. And, I still believe that. I think we can predict the future based on where we are and who we've been and the tendencies and the way we see the world and the language that we use and what we expect. That is what creates our future. For me, I began to understand that this future isn't set in stone, but is a series of possibilities that based on what I'm doing, and what I'm doing is based on who I was, really, I can then start to anchor in these different timelines. So that's where that curiosity all started. And then back in 2016, I think it was, I was introduced to the Akashic records, and that changed everything for me, because it was almost like all of these theories that I had just fell into place. They all just made sense based on this field that holds everything that us as a soul have ever done, known, been, had, and all of the possibilities that could happen. But not just that, not just the record, the individual of me and who I was, but also the field in which it sits in, that then contains everything that ever was, been, has, and will be.
So talk to me more about the Akashic records. And I know you just gave a definition, but for listeners who have no idea what the Akashic records are, how do you access them? I guess, like you just said, it's a record of everything that has been, will be, you know, for every soul, for everything that has ever existed. So if this is a new idea to people, how do we break that down a little bit and explain it?
So some people know the records as the book of life. I think they've spoken about that in many different spiritual texts and philosophies and religions. For me, it's more than that. It's this realm, it's this frequency, if you like, where everything is contained. Now, if you think about, like, really the term Akash means space or ether, right? And if you imagine, if we even look at things on a quantum level, most things are space. Like, was it something like 3% of the actual world is actual matter, right? And so everything else in between is something, and it contains something. It's not empty. So if I said, you asked me, well, how do I access it? And I would contemplate, maybe we are all accessing it all the time. Because if I said to you, think about your last holiday, and think about where you were and what you did and what you ate or what you experienced in that holiday. As you do that, a memory starts to come up. But that memory doesn't live in your brain. Like, we know that there's not a file that's like holiday 2022, right? That doesn't exist in there. It comes from somewhere. And as that appears, where are we drawing that information from? It's coming from somewhere. Science tells us that our brain starts firing off in all these different frequencies, but we can actually take that memory and start to draw visions from it. We can start to hear it. We can maybe even start to taste the salt in the air of the sea, or smell the hand soap, right, that they had in that hotel that we used every day. And so all of these things are coming and happening, and where is that information coming from? Also, when we are, who was it that said the answer to the problem doesn't exist at the frequency of the problem? Was it like Einstein, I think?
Einstein, yeah.
Yeah. And so we have a problem and we're putting it out there somewhere, and then all of a sudden we're doing something else. Like, what happened, was it with him that was sitting on the bus, and then the theory of relativity just dropped into his head, right? Things like that happen like all the time. You're just doing something and suddenly this inspiration just comes seemingly out of nowhere when you're doing something completely different. And you think, well, where's that come from? That's not, like, it's come from somewhere. So where? And on a fundamental level, from my understanding, it comes from this field that is the Akash, which is the ether, which is the space. Now, this space contains everything, right? So technically, I could go in there and be like, well, I want to know the answer to name your question, because it's all in there. I want to know the bank account details of Elon Musk. He won't notice if a spare $1 million is gone with it, for example. But it doesn't really work like that, because then we have our individual records. And so these are the records of your soul. And just like you might have a diary of all of the things that you've thought of today, and all of the things that you felt, and all of the actions and the incidents that you've done. If you had that diary, you'd probably keep it under lock and key. Your phone, you probably have your fingerprint locking it, right? And so our records are held and protected, if you like, so that people can't just jump in and out of them because they're yours. And, you know, it could be quite dangerous, right? If people just jump in and out of what other people are doing and into people's space and into people's deepest, darkest memories. And so this realm is, whilst it's everywhere, it resonates at a particular frequency, which belongs, if you like, or is matched, maybe a better word, to you and the individual that holds it.
I have so much to say about all of that. And I love everything you just shared. And, you know, like I said, we're so on the same page and we've read all the same things and studied all the same things, but it's always still so interesting to hear someone else explain it back to you from their unique perspective. Because as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, oh my gosh, yes, that makes sense. And, you know, I was thinking about like this flow state that we tap into, right? When you're like, where does this come from? Like, I feel like I channeled my book, right? I wrote the thing in like a month and it just like poured into me and I'm tapping into that field. So I guess, and also I think I was also thinking about past life regression hypnosis. Like that's why things like that work, because all of that information is stored on that frequency that is your soul, like you were saying, right? It's, right. I think it's Bruce Lipton talks about that, where he's like, you know, like you have a channel, a frequency, and let's say you're playing it through a TV and you're live right now, and then you pass over to the other side, like that frequency doesn't go away. It's just the TV died, right? But then if you get a new TV, you can still tap into that same channel. It's like your frequency never stops. Right. And I love that explanation too. So a lot of what you were describing is how I describe the quantum field, right? How we can manifest using the quantum field, and it's this space, this ether. So is that the same as the Akashic records? Are they one and the same, or do you see them as two different things?
I think that's a really great question, because I think in many ways they're the same, but I think there is a fundamental difference in that the quantum field is literally a field of everything, as the Akashic record is literally a field of everything. However, the Akashic records are held by these, if you like, beings. I don't know what you want to call them, but they're held, right? They're protected. And the field itself is held on the frequency of love, non-judgment, it's the frequency of soul, right? And all of the things like the non-judgment, compassion, empathy, understanding, acceptance. It's all of this stuff that when you go and access your records or the records of your client, you're accessing this field from that perspective. So I can't, with the quantum field, technically, I could go in, and if my vibration is right and correct and all of this stuff, I can literally go and fish anything out of it if I have that skill. With the Akashic records, I could be the most skilled Akashic record reader in the whole wide world. But if my intention isn't of love and healing and wisdom and openness, I won't be able to access anything.
So do you need permission from these beings to be able to access it? Or is it more that they just can read your energy and that's kind of like the lock and the key?
Yeah, I think it's I suppose it depends how you look at that. Do we need their permission? Yes, but it comes from your permission. So I could read your records only if you were like, Melissa, can you read my records, please? Let's do this. Let's open up. And then when we go in there, there's these beings who are holding the records for you. Now you can imagine how much stuff is in that space. Like literally, if you even think about how much is in there just from the last 24 hours, every single thought, every single emotion that you had, every TV program, every Facebook post that you've read, every word that you've spoken, every emotion that sits under it, and all of the things that, everything, just in 24 hours is a lot of stuff. Now, if we were going in there, what am I going to find out? Well, this is where this permission of frequency comes in. So I want to go in there really with this healing intention. It's like, well, I want to find out how what my path is, or I want to find out why I always find that I have this pattern that recurs over and over again. And I go in there with that and that openness and that curiosity and that, well, I want to do this because I want to show up better, be more of me, shine more of my light, create that positive impact in the world. Then chances are I'll receive the information that helps me understand that.
Yeah,
now,
that makes sense. And I was literally going to ask you, like, when you're reading someone's records, what are you often looking for? But that makes sense, right? Because it sounds like the future is in there as well, not just the past, right? If you're looking for someone's soul path or purpose.
Yeah.
So how do you personally tap into them? Do you have to go into meditation? Do you what's your process?
When I'm working with another, if I'm working on a one-to-one setting, I take us both through a meditation. So I'm guiding you in a meditation to protect the energy field, to get you relaxed and open, because your frequency, you need to feel safe, first of all, because if you're like, hi, no, anything, then nothing's going to happen. So we start with that, and we go through a really quite simple meditation, and then we meet one of your guardians, and from there we get let in. Now, I always ask for a healing intention. I think it's all, whilst we don't necessarily need something specific, and I do, normally what happens, people go, I say, what are you working on? And they're like, well, I want to know about my path and my purpose. And I'd also quite like to know why I don't have, why I've hit this ceiling of my income, and I want to know if the love of my life is going to come in. Like they kind of just throw that one in at the end, which is fine. And quite often the information that comes seems to work on all of these different levels. But I find that the more specific we can be about what it is that we are wanting to uncover, well, then the more resonance we seem to have with the answer, because there's a lot in there. And sometimes, sometimes it's not the most dramatic thing that's ever happened to you in a lifetime that's actually the thing that's influencing what it is that you want to know about now. But if well, I'm coming in there because I've got this money block when it comes to my healing work, for example, then when we go in, based on what you're open to and what you're available to and what's not going to further scar you. If you were going to go in there and you're going to find out that, something really awful and traumatic happened, and I start presenting that to you and you're like, oh my God, and you go into that fear or that panic or that guilt, then that's not going to be very helpful. So we just wouldn't get that information. The information just wouldn't come in, or at least not in that way. This happens every time. It's like the incident that maybe led to the next incident comes in, or maybe even one further down the line, which then gives us an understanding of, okay, now I can see why maybe I drew that conclusion about the world. And now maybe I can understand that I don't need that conclusion because it's not true. I thought it was true, but it's not. And even in that, we'll often do ceremony, healing, some form of ritual in there. But sometimes it's even just that. Oh, okay, I realised that once upon a time I got thrown off the boat. Now I know why I'm scared of sailing. I don't need to be scared of sailing anymore. And it can be that clean.
It reminds me of past life regression hypnosis again, where it's like your guides are only going to show you what you need to see relevant to this, right? It's not going to be something that's going to traumatize you, like you said. It's not going to be more information than you need that's going to confuse you. It's going to be like, here's that direct line.
Right.
And now you can kind of figure it out from there.
Right.
Wow. Okay. So it makes me want to get an Akashic Records reading. That's amazing. So have you seen a lot of success with clients that come to you? Like, are there any stories you can share?
There's so many, and the amazing thing about the records is that it can work in so many different levels and ways. And a lot of the people that I've seen, especially early on, when I first started really doing this, we keep in touch on Facebook or whatever, and I've just seen some things. Like, I had this one client who went through relationship after relationship after relationship, and she always just got this same kind of guy who wasn't the best kind of match for her, let's say that. And this was going on, she was pushed to just turning 30 at the time. We did some work, and it was really interesting what came up. It wasn't like, oh, you were XYZ with the man. There was all these kind of subtext stuff going on, and we did some clearing and healing with that. And we kept in touch over Facebook, and I saw it. It was about 9 months later, I saw that she was in this relationship. And then, a year after that, I could see she's still in this relationship. And so it continues. So there's so many incidents where I just see from one thing how, I work with a lot of healers, and quite often the story is, they don't want to be seen, they don't want to show up, they, can't get clear on their message and all of this stuff. And then suddenly you just see their healing business just skyrocket and move.
That's so amazing.
It really can change so much. I've seen people whose channeling abilities have gone from, well, they don't do it, and then they're like, oh yeah, I'm leading this channeling course, and I'm like, oh, are you? And it's not that I think, oh, well, this was all because of my reading and our session together. There's things like I could do like the best job in the world, but if you're not going to do the work afterwards, nothing's going to happen, because these are your records and this is your life. But I see it over and over and over again, how this 1% of a mindset shift or an energetic shift starts to propel people into a complete other direction, which for me is more important in many ways than those kind of big 180s. You really see that massive, like, oh my God, like I've changed tomorrow, which does also happen.
I love that, because, well, first of all, it's information that they're getting, right? It's what they decide to do with it, how they decide to apply it. And that choice, we all have free will, right? That choice is up to them. Like, as a healer, you can't force someone to change or heal, right? You can just guide them and show them the information. And I love that idea about a 1% shift, because it feels so small and almost insignificant in the moment that it's happening. But then if you think about like how that angle gets wider and wider and wider, and those paths go in different directions, and eventually it does become that complete life overhaul. But it starts with just that little spark. And that's how most change happens. And I talk about that a lot in my book too, like change your mind to change your reality. Like, it's really just a mindset change, because we have all these beliefs and opinions of others kind of piled on top of us, or beliefs and opinions that we've cultivated at a time that maybe kept us safe, right? You're falling off the sailboat example, right? But that's not going to serve you for the rest of your life. So if you can help someone make that tiny shift, it can completely change the trajectory of their life.
Right. And the thing is this realm and this field is becoming more and more available to us. And I think that as it does become, and I think that's because our consciousness is rising. Even 10, 15 years ago, there weren't this many conversations about this kind of topic happening. And I think a lot more people are coming into this awareness of vibration and altruism and creating positive impact and not working alone, but taking responsibility. And as all of these things pile in, this realm is going, okay, like, you're ready, let's work together, because your soul's path isn't just a set of traumas and misunderstandings that had happened. It's not just like, well, this is all the crap that's ever happened to me and I'm going to serve it up as a victim. This is like, well, this is all the stuff that happened, and look at what you deciphered from that. And actually look at also the strengths that you cultivated from having that, and the patterns that you had to get really good at in order to survive and maybe even thrive through that. Also, look at all of these incidents that happened where you were learning and where you were growing and where you helped other people and where you did create that positive impact and where you learned a skill or a theory, or you gave that whole life to God, for example, and that's there in your history, in your past, in your soul. And then you wonder why you get into this life, and what lights you up is this kind of conversation, or what lights you up is this, like, yes, it's in my power to heal. Well, maybe you've been training for it for lifetimes, and we can go into this realm and it's like, oh yeah, okay, well, maybe I'm not the imposter that's only been doing this for 5 years and they've been doing it for 50, so I should listen to them and no one should listen to me. Maybe it's like, well, I've been doing it for 5 lifetimes plus 5 years.
I love everything you just said, and I wish I could just like underline it and highlight it. So listeners, just like rewind and just listen to that again, because it's so important. And this is something I talk about a lot too, is people get so sucked into victim mode, but there is so much more going on. Life is happening for you, not to you, right? Like everything that you encounter, whether it's someone being mean to you or, this corrupt government that you might think, or whatever is going on, or this imposter syndrome you're feeling, it's all the universe orchestrating around you, moving around you based on, what you're manifesting and what you're creating to help propel you to the next level, right? Or to help bring into existence what you're manifesting, right? Like you were talking about quantum timelines earlier and quantum jumping, right? It's helping put you on that timeline based on what you've done in the past, what you're doing now, like your habits, your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotions. And so I always like to use the metaphor of the film strip to talk about exactly what you just talked about with, we think we have this story that's just like our little life here. Like, okay, I've been on this planet for 38 years. Like, this is my story. But like, if you think about a film strip, how it's like individual films, but it's all connected. Like, we're just looking at one little piece of film, right? But there's like a whole other backstory that's lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes, your entire soul existence, right, that led up to this moment that you don't even, you can't even conceive unless you get these past life regressions or these Akashic readings or whatever. But still, there's so much information. You can't even perceive like what led to this moment and your personality now and the things that you're passionate about in your path and all these things. Like I know I'm just kind of repeating what you said, but it just got me so excited because I think it's so important for people to understand.
Right. And you know what? Your soul is always giving you these little clues. Do you have to go into the Akashic records or have a past life reading or go and, whatever it is, go and lucid dream and find it out? No, it helps because of all the things that we've spoken about. But your soul is always giving you little clues. Like when I was there selling cars and I was feeling that low level anxiety, you know what that was? That was a clue from my soul that I wasn't doing the thing that I was born to do. Because if I was super happy, if I was like, yeah, it's amazing, it's the best thing ever, I would never have left. And I definitely wouldn't be doing this now. I'd have carried on. And, these things that really light you up, those little quirks that I think quite often, especially as teenage girls, we're told to hide and tone down. If we actually truly listen to them and learn to dial up those inner callings and the things that are driving us and pulling us and moving us, then we really can start to understand, okay, maybe I'm here for a reason, and maybe that reason is more than where I am. Doing the work, like working in the Akashic records, maybe accelerates that or gives you another perspective of that. Maybe that's what it is, but the clues are always there.
Yeah, and I think that it's about learning to tune in and listen, right?
Right.
Because you always have guides also, right? Your higher self, your guides, like all of these things are on the other side helping you, but you have to listen. You have to tune in, like you have to quiet your mind. And I think that's why going to someone who does this for a living is so helpful, because they help get you into that state and they teach you how to do that, so that hopefully you can then go on and do this on your own, right?
Right.
Is the hopeful idea.
Right. And, you know, sometimes it's even, this might blow your mind. So we spoke a little bit about the stories and the victim and the, you know, all of this stuff. If we looked at this purely from an Akashic point of view, right? That, remember what I said, it contains everything. It's a field of everything that's ever happened. But also it's a field of everything that's happening in this moment. Now the field doesn't judge. There's no like, oh, this is good, this is bad. It's not, you know, like white light dots and dark dots, right? It's just, this is what's happening. And also it doesn't know the difference between what you're imagining and what's really happening. The only way it knows the difference is the depth, right? If I'm just seeing something, there's no depth to it. It's like a line in my book. If I'm really experiencing and there's action and there's emotions and there's connections and all this stuff, then I'm writing a whole page or a chapter. So that's the only thing. But if I understand that, well, in every single moment of every single day, I am writing my Akashic records. And if I'm choosing to spend my whole life telling everybody, oh, well, I was a victim to this and this happened, and I can't get past that story, that even that story may have happened to me a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 lifetimes ago. Every time I bring it in the now and relive it and tell my friend and then the other friend and then the this and then the that and then myself, I'm rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it. So it becomes more of a part of my story. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying just ignore it, bat it away, because then it's still in there and it's still driving you. But if I can understand, well, what am I putting in my records now? Am I going to take this story that happened and go, okay, well, here's my story. This is what happened. And look at now the resilience that I have. Or look at then, well, this is really helping me understand unconditional love. Or this is really giving me this tool to see things from a different perspective, or to practice forgiveness, or whatever it is, that usually there's a growth opportunity somewhere, that I start to rewrite this text. This is the NLP stuff really coming back in. How am I choosing to talk to myself about it? Am I going to keep on presenting myself as a victim, and so therefore that energy is where I am? Or am I going to be like, well, I survived this and now my duty is to evolve and to thrive. How am I going to do that? The answer is all in there somewhere. But the real potency happens now in the moment. What am I choosing to do to start to write and score that new record, to do that 1% adjustment, to start to create this new trajectory?
I've heard of this happening with like from a biological standpoint, right? Where you recreate something. If you have a trauma and you try to relive it, or you relive that story, you're creating the same chemistry in your body, right? The same adrenaline gets released, the same cortisol gets released. But I've never thought about it from this perspective of the Akashic records, where you are literally the story writer of your own story. So you are responsible for, the next page of this story, the next chapter of this story, how this story is going to end, right? And you're literally writing it as you go. And you can live the same, let's say you live 20 more years, you can live the same year 20 more times, because you're stuck in this infinite loop and nothing's changing. You have the same thoughts, the same emotions, the same actions, the same habits. And that's just how your story goes. Or you can take responsibility for your story. You can say, like, how did this make me grow? How did this make me level up? How did this make me change my perspective? And you can literally change the trajectory of your story.
Right.
And it's not just the situations and the circumstances and the events that are in your life. With thinking about it in this Akashic Records point of view, it's your thoughts and your emotions.
Right. Right.
So it's like you are literally responsible, just you are solely responsible for how your story goes from here on out.
Right.
So, you know, just thinking about that, like, how do you want this to go? Right? You can get stuck in that loop and that victim mode, or you can really like literally take the pen, right? I would say like take the driver's wheel, but like you can take the pen and become the hero of your own story, right?
Exactly.
You can triumph, you can thrive, you can level up and expand your consciousness and grow and expand, and it's all up to you.
It's all up to you. I'm going to give this caveat, however, that when something's happened to us, and even if we can philosophize, will it happen for us and all of this, when something's happened to us and it's not great, then the nature of us is that we do keep on. Yeah. And, you know, like PTSD is a real thing, and, you know, trauma response is a real thing, and this, you know, dysregulation is a real thing. All of these things are real things. And this definitely isn't like, oh my God, I'm thinking of it again, and now I'm therefore doing this. For me, one of the perspective shifts I had through working in the records and seeing, you know, so many different past lives from this soul's point of view is you go back and you realize, okay, well, something happened to me and I took on this perception of the world because of what happened. Mm-hmm. And you start to see it or understand it from this different perspective of, oh, okay, maybe I allowed this to happen to me because I was looking for unconditional love, for example. But actually what happened there is I realized this thing, and then I drew the conclusion that all authority figures are greedy, for example. And as you start to see things from this different point of view, that when things are happening in your life now, I don't know, there's this, it's almost like this other voice comes in. It's like, okay, there's learning and there's growth from here. Now, if you're in that position where, well, actually these intrusive thoughts come in a lot. Yeah. And well, I can't help it, Melissa, because all of these things happened and they were traumatic. Well, then you do the work, because what's happening in that moment is there's this energy bubble, if you like, this huge, massive Akashic book that's sitting in there and it's trying to get your attention. And every time we bat it down, we're kind of saying, oh, no, that's not important. Or no, I'll get back to you later. That's kind of what we're saying. I'll get back to you later. And it's like, okay, well, I'll show up later again then. Thank you. What if we can take that book and kind of open it and go, okay, and start to dismantle the energetics that are sitting around it, the shame and the guilt and the fear and the anger and all of these conclusions that we've drawn from that point. We start to dismantle the energetics, not necessarily what happened, but the emotions that are surrounding that. And that can be through the records, but that can be through counseling, that can be through EFT, that can be through somatic movement, that can be through, like, you know, there's so many EMDR, there's so many different things that we can do and work with to get there. But then that becomes, as we start to do that, I'm bringing that and I'm bringing healing to that. You're writing that in your record. I'm empowering myself. I'm strong enough to know. I'm important enough to know that this doesn't have to create my future. This can just be an incident, what happened. And that is more powerful than I think we give credit to. Just that healing intention. I'm willing to grow. I'm willing to see myself. I'm willing to accept myself. I'm willing to thrive. We write that and things start to move and grow and change.
I love that point, and I'm really glad that you made it, because it's so important to take steps in your own healing. And so many people don't do that. You know, so many people stay in jobs that they're unhappy with because they have a fear of losing that security, right? Yeah. Which you and I can both relate to. They stay in relationships that are subpar because they don't want to be alone, or they don't think they're worthy enough. And so on and so on and so on, right? They don't take care of their health the way they should, or they don't know how to. So just taking that step towards your own healing, your own personal development and your own personal growth is huge.
Right.
And you know, I talk a lot on the show and in my book about releasing repressed emotions. So I'm totally with you there. But yeah, no, I think that's a really important point. I'm glad you brought it up. And I think it's a great way to just wrap it up today, because I can't believe we're already at an hour. This went by so fast. So I'm so happy you came on. Thank you so much, Melissa. Can you let people know how they can find you if they want to work with you? If you have any offers or anything you want to share?
Thank you. I am over the social media platforms at the Melissa Amos. I hang out way too much on Facebook, so if you want to find me on there, you probably will. So that's at the Melissa Amos. If you go onto my website, which is melissa-amos.com, put the / links in there, you'll see the link to my book, to all my social media channels, and also to a free gift that you can download to help you hear your own voice of your own intuition, so you can really learn how to dial into that. Depending when you're listening to this, coming up very soon, Soul School is starting mid-January. That is my Akashic Records training. It's a 12-month program to help you explore your own, but also to give you the skills that you need to start to do readings for your clients too. So I'm super excited about that coming in. But yeah, all the details are on that website, melissa-amos.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if you are listening, please like, share, subscribe. If you resonated with this episode, if we said something that blew your mind, please send it to someone you think could use it and needs to hear it. And I will see you all later in the next episode. Have a beautiful rest of your day.